Hi everyone, a very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to another session of RBI 247 where we discuss finance current affairs. Please give me a thumbs up if I'm audible to all of you and also if the board is visible. Today we're going to have a very interesting discussion about a very important topic, which is the global financial crisis. RBI specifically has mentioned the global financial crisis in your syllabus, that is finance syllabus, because it is a major event that took place or one such event that shook the entire nation. Debt crisis pehle bhi hue hain. I hope you are all aware of the US debt crisis that was there in the 1900s. However, after that, the 2008 crisis was very much in news, which shook the entire world because there was a domino effect and a lot of economies were affected. Okay, Rakshanda has said all perfect, ma'am. Let us then again start with the session today. Ma'am, brightness is high. Okay. I think it should be fine because it looks fine at my screen. Can anyone let me know if it needs to be adjusted more or is it fine? Okay, great. Then let's start with the global financial crisis. You might have heard of a lot of events or finance terms related to the global financial crisis. I remember there are so many terms that came in limelight after the global financial crisis. Terms like housing bubble, terms like mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, right? These are the kind of terms that were introduced or came into limelight after the 2008 crisis. Please adjust your device brightness. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'll be back in a minute. I guess I'm fine now. Okay, okay. Yes, yes. So now I think I'm audible. There was some technical error. Somebody was asking about, no, it wasn't on mute. When you come from outside, so ye problem aa jati hai kabhi kabhi. Okay, so Vijay Dadich was asking about the cryptocurrency session. If you go to the channel Anuj Jindal, in the live section you will find this video, right? Okay, now let's start with today's discussion. Like I said, so many terms we have heard right after this 2008 crisis, and exams may time and again they have been asked. For example, what is mortgage-backed securities? What is collateralized debt obligation? What is the housing bubble? Subprime lending crisis? Lehman Brothers downfall? These are all the topics that we have heard time and again after the global financial crisis. Now, I have already told you that RBI in its syllabus has specifically mentioned the global financial crisis. Two questions have been asked previously in descriptive section in 2021 and in 2022. In 2021, the descriptive question was, what is the global financial crisis? And in 2022, the question was the impact and India's response after the global financial crisis. That is how we know this topic is really important for us and needs to be prepared in detail. Now, let us start with the Lehman Brothers. सबने इसके बारे में सुना होगा. This was a company which initially started its business as a commodity investor or a commodity banker. Commodity trading करते थे ये, and around 1800s में. Later, they began in the investment sector. Investment banker बन गए. later they started getting involved in the investment banking. Now there was an act, the Glass-Steagall Act, which was repealed in the US. What is this Glass-Steagall Act and how the repeal of this act affected many companies, but especially the Lehman Brothers? As per this act, the banking sector or the financial institutions, they cannot involve themselves into both commodity trading and investment banking. The Glass-Steagall Act clearly states that one or any financial institution has to separate investment and commercial banking activities with respect to investment in the stock market. Because अगर आप दोनों में invest कर रहे हैं, that creates a risky situation. Combining the commercial and investment banking was considered too risky. Therefore, in 1933, this act was formed, which asked the financial institutions have to separate or choose between commodity trading or investment banking. However, this act was repealed in 1999. This act was repealed in 1999 with this Glass-Steagall Act. Why am I talking about? Okay, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, not the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act was in 1933. This was repealed in the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Now, why am I talking about this act? Because ये तो US के act है. See, the change of this act was the first step that somehow led to the global financial crisis. Now, it might be said कि housing bubble first step था, yes, but companies like Lehman Brothers and so many other companies, so many other financial institutions started doing both the things, and they started going into investment banking. That led to their growth, that led to their profitability. And there's one more reason why I'm discussing this act, because it has been asked in the RBI Grade B interview. RBI Grade B interview में पूछा हुआ है, what is Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act? So it removed the barriers that prohibited any institution from acting as any combination of investment, commercial banking or insurance company. Okay, so it repealed the earlier act, which was the Glass-Steagall Act. So 1999 के बाद क्या हुआ? Since the 2000, so many financial institutions, they started getting promoted through growth, and they started their functions in the investment banking sector. Okay. मैम इंटरव्यू के लिए सेबी न्यूज इंपॉर्टेंट है क्या? सारी न्यूज इंपॉर्टेंट है इंटरव्यू के लिए. दर्शना's doubt. Keep the session in English language. I am keeping the session in English language. Sampath. Okay. Okay. Now, there is another topic, which is the housing market bubble. What is the meaning of a bubble? A bubble happens, bubble-like situation happens when the prices of the asset prices inflate without any underlying cause. कोई ज़्यादा बड़ा reason होता नहीं है, but the prices of the assets boom. There is a boom in the prices of the assets. This happened in the housing market sector. Housing market में this started happening. How? सबसे बड़ा reason was the lax lending rules, the lax lending restrictions. Today, if you want to go and buy a housing loan, the first thing that any borrower would be worried about would be the lending restrictions, all the formalities that one would have to do to get a loan. The other reason that somebody would not go for a loan, a housing loan, is the high interest rate. So, the low interest rate in the housing sector led to people borrowing for purchasing houses or for investing in the housing sector. अगर मेरे को houses खरीदने हैं, multiple houses खरीदने हैं, so that tomorrow I can sell these houses at a high price when their value increases. In that, what I will do, I will buy these houses, but I do not currently have the money. So I'm going to ask banks to give me enough loans so that I can buy houses. That's how the housing price bubble happened, and it got inflated. Inflated मतलब ये bubble बन गया. Bubble is nothing but the price rise, the inflation of price जो एकदम से हो गया in the housing market. And when this bubble got burst, the prices of these high prices of these houses crashed. तो वो bubble burst हो गया. This is the whole concept of housing market bubble. यहाँ तक कोई problem? Okay, so the housing market bubble that began to form in the 2017, this laid the foundation. This laid the foundation of the global financial crisis. Banks and lending institutions offered low interest rate on mortgages and encouraged many homeowners to take out loans that they couldn't afford. Now, what started happening? When you know that investment in one sector is increasing, अभी price इतने नहीं है, but future में price बहुत बढ़ेंगे. What will you as investors do if you have money? What are you going to do? You're going to buy these low stocks or the low hanging fruits, जो कि अभी बहुत सस्ते प्राइस पे हैं, but you know in future the prices is going to rise. That's why investment in that sector is going to increase because there is expectation of high price. So what started happening was a lot of investors, a lot of consumers, they started buying houses, right? और बहुत ज़्यादा government, the US government was also promoting investment in the housing sector. It wanted everybody to buy a house, or that वो trend चल रहा था that one should have their own house. So lending started happening to even the borrowers who did not have good credit worthiness. Credit worthiness is an important term here. If you do not have good credit worthiness, क्या होगा? आगे जाके default होगा लोन पे और NPAs बढ़ेंगे banks के, and banks के NPAs बढ़ेंगे. So this is the reason of subprime lending. This is actually what happens in subprime lending. जब आप prime market को छोड़ के ऐसी market में lending कर रहे हैं, when you ignore the actual market, that potential market, which is the credit worthy market, and you start giving loans to the to the people who do not have good credit worthiness, that's when subprime lending takes place. This concept is known as subprime lending. Now what started happening? Because there were so many investments in the housing sector, there's one more concept I want to bring into attention right now, right here, is the mortgage-backed securities. So the Lehman Brothers had deeply invested in MBS. But what is MBS? So what happens is, let's suppose you are a bank. You have given a lot of loans. And in these loans, you have a collateral. This becomes a mortgage agreement. अगर आपको कोई पूछे कि mortgage होता क्या है, a mortgage is nothing but an agreement where the banks lend the borrowers and the borrowers give a collateral in return. So a mortgage is nothing but an agreement where a bank gives the loan to the borrower and the borrower gives a collateral. ठीक है, generally वो housing होता है या कोई security या property के papers. That is the collateral that is given. So what happens is, ऐसे बैंक ने बहुत सारे mortgage agreement sign करे हुए हैं, which is the loans that the banks have given. Now what the banks can do, and they usually do, is that they sell these loans to investors, to financial investors, to investment bankers. Somebody was asking, what is investment banking? When the banks also start working in the investment sector, बहुत सारी जगह उन्होंने invest करा हुआ है. What happens when investment takes place? Liquidity is pushed in the economy. इसीलिए बहुत important होता है investment bankers का role, because through them the liquidity is infused in the economy. Now, how is liquidity infused? There were these loans that banks had given. Now, banks will sell these loans to financial institutions and investment bankers. In return, banks will have more money. Through these money, they will further lend. तो ऐसे क्या हो रहा है? एक लोन से और पैसा वो generate कर रहे हैं. They are generating more money and they are lending further. So liquidity से और ज़्यादा पैसा economy में as credit grow हो रहा है. Right? So this was a cycle that was happening. Now what is a mortgage-backed security? MBS. What happens is, so many loans, so many mortgage agreements, similar mortgage agreements, when they are pooled together by these banks and they are sold in tranches. ये हमने securitization में पढ़ा था last year. However, I'm quickly explaining it to you again. All these loans, all these mortgage agreements that banks had, what they do is, they pool these agreements, they make a bundle. They make a bundle, and out of these bundles, इस bundle को further security की तरह एक type के bundle के loans, let's suppose similar type of interest rate, similar type of all the repayment period. So जो भी terms and conditions है, when the terms and conditions are similar, that is one bundle is created. So एक bundle की securities बन गई. Similarly, there are so many securities or tranches that are created and these securities are sold to investment bankers. This is nothing but mortgage backed securities, because this is a security which is backed by a mortgage agreement. यहां तक किसी को प्रॉब्लम है? Shark, I am going a little slow, okay, but I'll explain it to you if you want me to. Subprime lending, Shivam is asking what is subprime lending? When banks or financial institutions, they start lending to borrowers which do not have good credit worthiness, जिसकी वजह से आगे जाके NPAs increase होंगे. That is subprime lending. Okay? Okay. ठीक है. So this is the concept of mortgage-backed securities. These securities are clearly backed by a mortgage agreement. Similarly, collateralized debt obligations भी ऐसे ही होते हैं. When all these loans are pooled and further any investor is borrowing the debt खरीद रहा है, loan खरीद रहा है या debt obligation खरीद रहा है, that becomes a collateralized debt obligation. और collateral debt obligation, क्योंकि इसमें collateral भी है आपके पास, that is the security. Then we have the debt जो कि loan है. So जिसके पास भी ये CDO है, whoever is holding the paper of the CDO, they have the right to the security property, let's suppose. So in case there is a default, they can claim the property. Plus क्योंकि ये debt agreement है, तो principal plus loan भी whoever has invested in the CDO, they have the right of principal and interest because ये debt agreement है और in future collateral भी हो सकता है because the banks have sold their loans to these investors. One such investor was Lehman Brothers, who had invested heavily in mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. यहाँ तक समझ आ गया? What did banks get by selling loans? Banks get further liquidity. Okay? That's how they channelize. That's how a cycle is created. When you sell your loans, you can get more money from these investment bankers and you can lend more using that money. Okay, Rakshanda, clear, ma'am? Okay, ठीक है. So the Lehman Brothers was its deep dive into loan origination into So this was one more thing. The Lehman Brothers was also started acquiring a large number of lenders. Further, these lenders were into subprime lending. So double game हो गई यहाँ पे. Here they are investing into MBS. They have also acquired loans, acquired banks, lenders मतलब banks. So they have acquired a lot of banks and further in banks ने loans कहाँ दिया हुआ था? Housing sector में, जिसको हम बोल रहे हैं subprime lending. Okay, is it clear till here? They have also acquired banks and they have also invested in MBS. Now this is the concept that we have just studied. Lehman Brothers grew fast in investment banking and commercial banking. They issued MBS. Subprime borrowers failed to pay back interest on housing loans. This is what we call as housing bubble burst or inflate. Okay, so what happens is when these subprime borrowers, अगर आप किसी को loan दे रहे हैं, जबरदस्ती low rate पे आप loan दे रहे हैं, they're going to pay back you the money initially, but after a point, since they are not credit worthy individuals, they are not credit worthy borrowers, they are going to default on your loan. अब loan पे default हुआ, banks got affected. These mortgaged loans that were there, these were in the hand of investment bankers like Lehman Brothers. So these were in the hands of investment bankers. अब because they started defaulting, which means जो इनके पास MBS था, उन पे default होने लग गया. Further, these investment banks had also sold in the market, in the secondary market. इतना detail में हम नहीं जाएंगे. But ऐसे धीरे धीरे करके a lot of investors started having losses because subprime lending was the main crisis, क्योंकि subprime lending हुई है. Okay, so this is how the entire economy crashed. I have explained it to you what MBS is. When you take a loan from a bank, all the mortgages are pooled or similar kind of mortgages are pooled and then they are sold to investors. And investors invest or they buy the MBS. These investors are investment banks like Lehman Brothers. Okay, now what happened when the crisis took place? A lot of countries followed different approaches. Now we are coming to the approaches that were followed. Now, सबसे पहले what is austerity? Austerity is a concept where the government follows various policies to reduce its burden. The government follows various policies to reduce its burden. कैसा burden? Fiscal deficit अपना reduce करना. So the government wants to reduce the fiscal deficit. These kind of austerities were followed by the European countries. Similarly, countries like US, they started following quantitative easing. The Fed Bank, the Fed Reserve, that is the US's central bank, the Fed Reserve, it started following the quantitative easing. Let us quickly understand what are austerities and what is quantitative easing. Like I explained, austerity is used by the governments that find difficult to borrow to meet their existing obligations to pay back their loans, which means in countries को, in governments को fiscal deficit हो रहा था. So what they did for fiscal deficit, they started increasing their revenue. अब revenue कैसे increase करेंगे? Tax raise करके और government spending को reduce करके, जिसकी वजह से because of which there was more pressure on these economies which were majorly European economies. Okay, the aim was to reduce the government budget deficit through spending cuts, tax increases connected from here. These were austerities, one part of the situation. Now, let's come to the second part of the situation, which is quantitative easing. What happens is, when the economy is slowing down, the central bank of any country, let's suppose the Fed Reserve, जो कि US का central bank है, the Fed Reserve, it wants to push liquidity into the economy. When liquidity is increased, money supply is increased. When money supply is increased, slowly and slowly, demand in the economy will increase. Consumption बढ़ेगी, people will start borrowing more, people will start consuming more, happy economy. Okay. Okay. Now, this is what the Fed Reserve is targeting. How is it going to do that? It is going to purchase bonds and securities from open market plus banks. What will happen? What is going to happen if they purchase bonds and securities? The first and foremost thing is liquidity will be pushed. If you purchase bonds and securities from the market, अब बहुत banks के पास securities हैं, but they do not have liquidity. They have securities, but they do not have liquidity. अब liquidity नहीं है, so economy में growth कैसे होगी? Aggregate demand कैसे बढ़ेगी? This is what the central bank of any country, what they do is they buy security, क्योंकि ये security से आप you cannot transact through the security. You want money. So the liquidity is pushed into the economy and these security are purchased. This process is known as quantitative easing. The opposite of this concept is Fed tapering. कभी और समझेंगे what is Fed tapering? Very easy, it is just the opposite. जब the central bank when it decides कि अब quantitative easing हम नहीं करेंगे, so हम क्या करेंगे? Fed tapering, meaning quantitative easing कम करेंगे. Okay, in detail we will understand this in another class, let's say, but this Fed tapering started happening in 2013. So 2009 से लेकर 2011-2012 तक quantitative easing policies were being followed not just by US but also other economies as well, including India. And 2013 के बाद क्या हुआ? Fed tapering started happening. Fed tapering का एक और consequence होता है taper tantrums. ठीक है, डिटेल में नहीं जाते, just because I know stuff, so I have a habit of explaining or telling more. यहाँ तक किसी को डाउट है? Please ask me if you have a doubt, or else I'll move forward. Okay. Now, let's come to impact on our country, India. First, let's talk about impact. Impact was not that direct because Indian financial institutes ka, Indian investment bankers ka, the banks of India, they did not have direct exposure to securities in the US, which means they had not invested heavily in the securities of the US. Therefore, there was very limited impact. However, impact एक जगह बहुत ज़्यादा आया, which was the financial institutional investors. They started MBS. Yes, you can say it is a kind of a derivative because they are underlined by mortgage, which is an asset. But however, the derivative में future और फ्यूचर प्राइसेस की बात होती है, सो इट इज ऑल्सो इन केस नॉट अ डेरिवेटिव, बिकॉज in the derivative there is most of the time there is a concept of future buying and selling. Okay, voice should be there. Okay, Ajay, thank you, voice is fine. ठीक है. So what was I talking about? The impact on India. So the the foreign investors, foreign institutional investors started taking their money back. What started happening after that? There was depreciation of rupee. 49 के आसपास था, which ended off at 52. उसके बाद 52 से भी ज्यादा बढ़ गया. That was the rupee dollar exchange rate in 2008. That was the first and the foremost impact on the Indian economy was depreciation of rupee. अब depreciation of rupee होगा तो import export में भी बहुत ज्यादा impact आएगा. Which I want you to tell me what happens when this happens. Okay, when there is appreciation of Indian currency, what is going to be the impact on import and export? Now, the fast depreciation of rupee because of the massive outflow of foreign institutional investors, that was one thing. Now, export import pe impact, that was another thing. However, not a major impact, but yes, a limited impact. जिसकी वजह से government को they started facing, when there is going to be an impact on the export and import, is going to be something that is twin deficit. अब एक नया concept समझते हैं. We are talking about twin deficit. Does anyone know what is twin deficit? Can anyone tell me what is twin deficit? Export goes down. Okay, with appreciation, exports goes down. बिल्कुल, but here depreciation is happening. So, twin deficit is दो type के deficits हो रहे हैं government को. One is the fiscal deficit and the other is current account deficit. After the 2008 crisis, what started happening was both of these twin deficits, that is, the fiscal deficit started increasing and the current account deficit started increasing. What is this cash? It is nothing but when imports are increasing, imports में पैसा ज़्यादा जा रहा है, even if the imports are not increasing in volume, their value is increasing, meaning हम पैसे अब we are paying more rupee, which happens in depreciation. We are paying more rupee for importing. And imports are more than exports. When imports are more than exports, तो हमारा क्या होगा? Current account deficit. Similarly, fiscal deficit is when the government has to borrow from outside to meet its expenditure. Okay? High inflation, low growth. Pooja is right. Parijat is saying, ma'am, even now the value of dollar is high. Can you give me 2 reasons why the value of dollar is high right now? I'll give you one reason, that is the supply chain disruptions because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Can you give me one more reason why the value of dollar is high currently? Moving on, off topic nahi jate hain. We were talking about the steps taken to tackle the crisis situation. The RBI reduced the CR. Okay, so what started happening? अब क्योंकि deficit हो रहे हैं government को, there is not enough liquidity in the banking sector because यहाँ पे भी lending कम हो गई, borrowing कम हो गई. The banks stopped lending or they reduced lending, and the consumers or the investors or the corporates, they started reducing their borrowing. अब borrowing कम होगी तो aggregate demand कैसे बढ़ेगी? How will the consumption increase? This was the issue. So what started happening was the RBI had to infuse liquidity in the economy. What they did was सबसे पहले CRR को immediately they reduced it. Initially, अभी तक 2008 तक inflation increase हो रही थी. To curb the inflation, what the RBI was doing, RBI was increasing CRR. But suddenly, global financial crisis हुआ, the RBI changed its policy quickly, and the CRR was reduced. Similarly, the SLR was reduced. If anyone wants to know what is CRR and SLR, I want you to go through the static portion of RBI functions and find out what CRR and SLR are. They are very easy concept. अगर आप RBI की तैयारी कर रहे हैं, this is something that you should know in the first or the second class only. Okay. Now, the CRR was reduced. The SLR, that is the statutory liquidity ratio, was reduced to ensure sufficient liquidity in the banking system. अब banks के पास ज़्यादा पैसा होगा, they will be able to lend more. The RBI also reduced its repo rate. Like I said, immediately the RBI switched to easing monetary policy. Easing monetary policy. Can anyone tell me what is easing monetary policy? Who is going to tell me what is easing monetary policy, which the RBI started following? Now, this was about RBI. Let's talk a little about the government, because government ko twin deficits ho rahe the. I just explained it to you. Now, the government started giving fiscal stimulus. Something that recently happened in COVID, the government started giving fiscal stimulus. The same thing the government started doing back then. Fiscal stimulus में क्या होता है? The government reduces its tax rates and increases its spending. So what the government did was, it wanted to push growth in the infrastructure sector, in the textile sector, the booming sector जिनमें scope बहुत ज़्यादा है. Okay, everybody has given the right answer. Repo rate decrease करना, that is easing monetary policy. बिल्कुल. Giving more purchasing power to public. Monica, yes. ठीक है. Pushing money into the market. Jay Meena is also right. ठीक है. So the first package was done through reducing the excise duty, which is the CENVAT. CENVAT is the central VAT, value added tax, which was operational at that time, जिसके बाद VAT आया था. So the cut in the excise duty was the first stimulus. 4% cut down हुआ था the excise duty में, जिसकी वजह से government had approx 8,000 crore का revenue loss, because आप अपना tax कम कर रहे हैं, that is nothing but you are giving fiscal stimulus. When the tax is reduced, spending will increase. अब आपके पास पैसा ज़्यादा है because government ने tax कम कर दिया है. The second package was increasing in the expenditure in the infrastructure sector, especially in the NBFC. जो NBFC's infrastructure थे, they were allowed to borrow from the government at low rates. So 30,000 crore की borrowing was promoted at that time to the infrastructure sector. This is another stimulus that happened in January 2009. Going further, in 2009, the third package was introduced, which was again cutting down further the excise duty, customs duty, service tax, और जो भी बचे हुए tax थे, they were reduced, thus pushing liquidity in the economy and increasing spending and increasing the aggregate demand. This was the impact on India and the steps taken by India. Let us now come to questions. In case anyone has any doubt, you can ask me. Otherwise, I want you to solve these questions. Here I have already highlighted the answer, but this answer tells you that one statement is correct. I want you to tell me which statement is correct. How many of these statements below are correct about the MBS, mortgage backed security? Sampath, the PPT is available on Telegram channel. Ayush, I have already told you. Okay, so the RBI 247 key monthly PDF will be available after the month of September, because we started from August mid. Okay, only if you are an enrolled student. Okay, so the correct statement here is they have no collateral. ये तो गलत है, because they are backed by the mortgage. They are issued by banks against deposits that have received from customers. This is also incorrect. They are a class of derivative. This statement is correct. They can be backed by non-physical assets like copyrights and trademarks. This statement here is incorrect. Now, let's come to the second statement. What is the objective of Glass-Steagall Act? Objective बताना है आपको. To separate the investment and commercial banking activities. This is correct. So option 1, only option 1 is correct, which is A. Let's come to question number 3. How many of the following are the reasons for Lehman Brothers crisis or the global financial crisis? Banks like Lehman Brothers failed to penalize the defaulters. This is incorrect. Subprime borrowers failed to pay back interest on house loans. This is correct. On over-globalization, asset liability mismatch, this is the correct answer. Therefore, only one statement here is correct. Question number 4. Which of the following statements are correct about quantitative easing? This is a very easy question. It is a tool used to increase the supply of money in the market. The RBI purchases bond securities from the open market. Both these statements are correct. So here the answer would be option 2 and option 3 are correct. Okay. This brings us to the end of the class today. If you have any doubt, you can ask me in the comment section below or in discussion forum for the enrolled students. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked it and I hope you understood whatever was taught to you. All the very best for your upcoming exams.